The default script for a dying brand usually follows a predictable corporate eulogy. A press release blame shifts toward changing consumer habits, rising labor costs, or the vague specter of inflation. But when Denny's quietly announced it was acceleration testing the closure of up to 90 of its traditional 24-hour diners, the explanation felt hollow. This isn't just about a bad quarter. This is about a structural trap that has been snapping shut on the American casual dining landscape for a decade, and Denny's just happened to step directly into the center of the trigger mechanism to understand the panic inside the boardroom. You have to look at a number that executives rarely broadcast to the public: 160 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the exact thermal boundary where a food safety protocol transforms from a baseline standard into an operational impossibility when a kitchen is running on a skeleton crew at 3 o'clock in the morning. For generations, the diner chain built its entire economic moat on a single, uncompromising promise: absolute availability. It was the neon sanctuary of the interstate system, a place where the doors literally did not have locks because they were never intended to close. But in 2026, that 24-hour promise has mutated from a competitive advantage into a financial and logistical parasite. The crisis hiding behind the boarded-up windows of these 90 locations isn't just that people are eating fewer pancakes. It's that the very physics of running a non-stop restaurant in the modern economy have broken down. The math no longer works. The supply chains are fracturing under the weight of hyper-industrialization. And the safety margins that once kept the grease fires and health inspectors at bay have worn down to razor-thin tolerances. Think about what actually happens when a restaurant chain attempts to preserve its profit margins while its core customer base is actively pulling back on discretionary spending. You don't just raise the price of a Grand Slam combo to $14 and hope nobody notices the compounding premium on basic eggs and flour. You start looking for internal efficiencies. You look at the graveyard shift, the hours between midnight and 5 a.m., where revenue drops to a trickle but the utility bills and labor costs remain fixed. You reduce the staff. You leave a single cook and a lone server to manage an entire footprint designed for a team of 6. And that is exactly where the hidden rot begins to spread. When an overnight kitchen is starved of human capital, the entire operational architecture begins to degrade in a specific, measurable sequence. First, the cleaning schedules slip. A deep clean requires a shutdown. But when the grill never goes cold and there are only 2 pairs of hands on deck, maintenance becomes reactive. Then the equipment begins to drift. Refrigeration units and warming trays operating under continuous, unmaintained strain start running 3 or 4 degrees outside their mandated safety parameters, to a corporate auditor looking at a spreadsheet in an office 3 states away. A deferred maintenance request is just a cost-saving metric that helps hit a quarterly target. To a line cook sweating through a double shift in a half-empty diner, it means working with a walk-in cooler that cannot hold its chill against the humid air of a summer night. This is the open loop that the casual dining industry is desperate to keep hidden from the public eye: the direct, unvarnished link between a corporate restructuring plan and the physical reality of what sits on your plate at 2 a.m. When a brand decides to close nearly 100 stores to protect its stock price, it is sending a warning flare about the survival of its entire business model. The locations hitting the chopping block aren't just underperforming properties, they are the canaries in the economic coal mine, suffocating under a combination of soaring real estate costs, real-time supply chain vulnerabilities, and an institutional culture that has systematically traded long-term operational integrity for short-term financial engineering. We are witnessing the end of an era where a major national footprint could be maintained on cheap commodities and low-wage availability. The game has changed completely. The brands that are surviving aren't the ones with the largest neon signs or the deepest historical nostalgia. They are the ones that recognize the geographic and economic traps of the post-inflationary landscape and chose to pivot before the market forced their hand. Denny's is running out of road because it tried to maintain a mid-century infrastructure in a high-cost environment, leaving its remaining operators trapped between impossible corporate mandates and an increasingly cynical public that can taste the cut corners in every bite. To diagnose how a multi-billion-dollar breakfast empire reached a point of forced contraction, one must analyze the structural mechanics of the casual dining franchise model and the geographic vulnerabilities that built it. Denny's did not collapse into this restructuring cycle overnight. The company engineered its own vulnerability over a 30-year period through a strategic shift known in the hospitality industry as an asset-light corporate model, beginning heavily in the late 1990s and accelerating through the 2010s. Denny's corporate leadership systematically sold off company-owned restaurants to private franchise operators. By 2026, over 95% of all Denny's locations nationwide were owned and operated by franchisees rather than the parent corporation. This asset-light strategy functioned precisely as intended on corporate balance sheets, shifting the direct burdens of real estate maintenance, local labor liabilities, and volatile food costs entirely onto independent operators, while corporate collected a steady, predictable stream of royalty fees based on gross sales. However, this financial insulation created a profound operational disconnect. The corporate office in Spartanburg, South Carolina, retained absolute control over menu pricing guidelines, national marketing strategies, and strict brand mandates, while the local operators bore the actual physical costs of executing those mandates. This dynamic turned fatal when the macroeconomic landscape shifted violently between 2021 and 2025. During this period, the baseline commodities that dictate the economics of an American breakfast experienced unprecedented structural inflation. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the wholesale cost of eggs, poultry, and dairy products escalated by double-digit percentages annually, driven by a combination of global supply chain blockages and domestic outbreaks of highly pathogenic avian influenza that decimated commercial egg-laying flocks across the Midwest for a traditional restaurant operating on standard business hours. These inflationary pressures were difficult but manageable through tactical menu adjustments and operating hour restrictions. For a 24-hour diner network, the mathematical reality was entirely different. The cost of electricity, heating, and ventilation for a commercial kitchen remains largely static, whether the dining room is at maximum capacity during the Sunday morning rush or completely empty at Tuesday at 3:15 a.m. As utility rates surged across major commercial corridors, the overhead cost of maintaining a hot line through the dead of night began to erase the profit margins generated during the daytime hours. Independent franchisees found themselves locked in a geographical and contractual vice. On one side, corporate agreements legally obligated them to remain open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to preserve the national brand identity. On the other side, local labor markets were shifting rapidly. The implementation of localized minimum wage increases across key growth states like California, New York, and Illinois fundamentally altered the labor cost equation. In jurisdictions where the minimum wage for tipped and non-tipped workers crossed the $15 per hour threshold, the cost of staffing a mandatory overnight skeleton crew, traditionally consisting of at least one line cook, one dishwasher, and one server, became a net negative financial proposition if the location failed to hit specific hourly revenue benchmarks during those shifts. Operators were legally trapped into paying premium labor rates during the lowest volume hours of the week, with zero authorization from corporate to adjust their operational hours to match local demand patterns. To offset these compounding operational losses, franchisees utilized the only lever left under their direct control: retail menu pricing. The rapid escalation of Denny's menu prices from 2022 to 2026 was not a coordinated corporate choice to transition into a premium dining brand. It was a desperate, decentralized survival mechanism implemented by localized operators trying to outrun their rising fixed costs. When a basic breakfast combo crossed the $14 mark and a standard cup of black coffee approached $4 in suburban markets, the chain broke its historical psychological contract with the American consumer. Denny's had spent decades positioning itself as the baseline option for budget-conscious families, interstate travelers, and working-class shift workers. By pricing its menu at parity with upscale casual dining establishments, it alienated its core demographic without capturing the higher-income consumers who demand a fundamentally different level of physical ambiance and ingredient quality. The geographic distribution of the 70 to 90 locations designated for closure in the 2025 and 2026 restructuring wave reveals a clear pattern of systemic failure. The closures are heavily concentrated in mature, high-cost suburban markets and older urban corridors where real estate leases signed in the early 2000s are expiring. Under the standard terms of commercial real estate agreements, renewals are executed at current market rates, which have risen dramatically due to institutional real estate speculation and commercial zoning constraints. A franchise location that was financially viable under a lease structured in 2006 became functionally insolvent when forced to renegotiate terms in a real estate market where triple net lease costs have doubled. The parent company's public statements during this contraction period emphasized the term underperforming locations. But internal industry audits paint a more complex picture of supply chain starvation. Smaller franchise groups, managing between 3 and 10 locations, lacked the massive purchasing leverage of the mega conglomerates that control hundreds of fast food territories. When corporate distribution partners raised transport and fuel surcharges to compensate for driver shortages and diesel fuel volatility, these smaller operators were forced to pay a higher per-case premium on every delivery of frozen hash browns, pre-cooked meat products, and liquid shortening. The structural architecture of the asset-light model meant that corporate continued to extract its top-line royalty revenue even as the net profitability of the individual storefront slid into negative territory, creating an environment where the permanent shuttering of the restaurant became the only legal path out of an unsustainable commercial lease. The operational crisis within the casual dining sector extends far beyond the financial balance sheets of individual franchisees and directly into the domain of regulatory compliance and public health. An examination of municipal health department inspection records from 2024 through mid-2026 across several key metropolitan markets reveals a persistent pattern of critical food safety violations at multiple major breakfast chains. These documents establish that the confluence of chronic understaffing, equipment fatigue, and high-volume velocity has systematically compromised the sanitization protocols that are foundational to commercial kitchen operations in the southern and midwestern United States. Public health inspection databases document recurring citations classified as high-risk or critical infractions. At several underperforming locations currently targeted for closure or corporate restructuring, inspectors noted repeated failures to maintain proper cold holding and hot holding temperatures. According to the Food and Drug Administration Food Code, hazardous foods including raw, liquid egg mixtures, poultry and dairy products must be maintained at or below 41 degrees Fahrenheit to inhibit rapid bacterial growth. Conversely, cooked proteins held for service must remain at or above 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Inspection reports from locations in Ohio, Georgia, and Florida detailed instances where walk-in coolers and line-side refrigeration units operated at internal temperatures ranging between 44 and 47 degrees Fahrenheit for consecutive weeks. The technical documentation indicates that these temperature variances were frequently caused by worn door gaskets, failing compressors, and deferred condenser coil maintenance. In these environments, the biological margin of safety vanishes. Kitchen staff, working under high-pressure morning shifts or isolated graveyard hours, frequently relied on visual assessments rather than calibrated STEM thermometers to verify product safety, leading directly to the citation of active food safety hazards by regulatory authorities. The staffing shortages that peaked across the industry between 2023 and 2025 created specific procedural failures during the late-night and early morning shifts. A detailed review of employee scheduling logs subfiled in regional labor disputes demonstrates that many 24-hour locations frequently operated with a total staff of 2 individuals between the hours of midnight and 6 West a.m. Under these conditions, the operational workflow requires the line cook to simultaneously manage raw product retrieval, active grilling, order plating, and dish sanitization. This collapse of specialized kitchen roles leads directly to cross-contamination events documented in health department filings. Inspectors repeatedly recorded instances of employees transitioning from handling raw pork sausage or chicken breast to plating cooked pancakes and toast without performing the mandatory 20-second hand-washing protocol or replacing disposable gloves. Furthermore, the chemical sanitizing solutions utilized in towel buckets on the line were frequently found to be depleted of active quaternary ammonium or chlorine compounds, rendering them ineffective at mitigating surface-level pathogen transmission. The friction between corporate mandates and local regulatory reality has also manifested in corporate litigation and public enforcement actions. In 2024, corporate oversight boards faced internal whistleblower filings from restaurant managers who alleged that regional directors actively discouraged the discarding of out-of-date food products to artificially suppress food waste metrics. These metrics directly influence manager bonuses and franchise profitability rankings. When food waste targets are prioritized over safety protocols, older inventory is routinely commingled with fresh shipments, making precise lot traceability impossible in the event of localized foodborne illness outbreaks. Simultaneously, the competitive landscape has shifted towards specialized breakfast operations that have engineered their infrastructure to bypass these specific systemic traps. The growth of daytime-only breakfast and branch models has introduced a structural alternative that alters the industry's labor and food safety dynamics. Chains operating strictly between 6 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. have effectively eliminated the operational dead weight of the midnight shift. This daytime-only architecture provides a built-in 8-hour window every night dedicated entirely to kitchen sanitation, preventive equipment maintenance, and orderly inventory rotation. Furthermore, these daylight-oriented operations attract a different tier of food service labor. Human resource data from hospitality analytics firms show that daytime shifts experience a 40% lower employee turnover rate compared to 24-hour operations. This stability allows managers to maintain rigorous institutional knowledge regarding food safety protocols and consistent execution. The resulting operational compliance is reflected directly in public records. Daytime-only chains show a significantly lower frequency of critical health code violations per location than their 24-hour competitors. The financial and operational reality of 2026 has created a clear divergence in the market. The traditional, nationwide, all-hours casual dining model is caught in an escalating spiral of rising fixed overhead, aging infrastructure, and regulatory pressure. The physical condition of many older kitchens indicates that the capital expenditure required to modernize refrigeration networks and retrain transient kitchen staff exceeds the projected lifetime value of these underperforming properties. As corporate entities continue to scrub these locations from their active portfolios to protect top-line margins,